Okay.
Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host Talking to People. I want to do a primer on economics, rights, and government because I have a lot of these kind of arguments in here. Sometimes I get frustrated and get abusive, like that English guy was saying. You're right, English guy. I was being abusive. I apologize. That was my bad. I shouldn't have acted like that. I got frustrated because
Apology accepted.
thank you very much. I got a little frustrated because I guess I didn't really come in here planning to argue that stuff, but I came in and they were talking Islam, and I just kind of yeah, I don't know. I'm frustrated because I got all this work shit to do too. So anyway, thank you for accepting my apology. Let's move forward. Um, my primer on it is, and everyone can agree or disagree with it, but this is my basic reasoning on the thing. And I would say before you enter any argument about economic government or rights or politics or anything like that, you should at least know the following things. You should have a definition of a right. A right is that which confers a duty upon another. And you should also have a definition of wealth. And the best definition of it is wealth is that which is created when an individual applies labor to a resource. Now, the reason we have so many policy disputes in part is because people don't have definitions for those two words. And so when they say, well, it's not fair that some people are so rich and some people are poor, they do so operating from an assumption that the government creates the money and passes it out, which of course is not the case at all. The government prints money and ever more money to represent the fact that ever more wealth is being created by individuals doing the labor to resources. Now, the extent to which that wealth is created for themselves or for an employer or whatever depends on who owns the resource that labor is being applied to. All right. So the next thing to note before we even begin the rights framework idea is that only individuals can take action. So we talk about group agents like the government, but it's before we can really, and we tend to forget that that's a metaphor. The government is a set of justifications and um, what's mandates that people behave certain ways under certain circumstances. And so, for example, a cop, I can't put you in handcuffs arbitrarily and say, I don't like the way that you looked at me, therefore I'm putting you in handcuffs. That would be a crime. But if a cop does, it's not a crime. So government is the thing that adjudicates that sets the rules for when individuals ought to behave X, Y, or Z, and when we ought to make exceptions to the general rule against transgression. There's a general rule in society that says, unless otherwise noted, it's not okay for me to transgress upon you. To transgress upon simply means to use coercion, force, threat of force, or some other means to interfere with your business when you haven't done something first. Okay, so now let's get back to the issue of rights. The core of the rights framework is that you're born owning your own body, and the reason you're born owning your own body is that it's only possible for you to be born in three states of being. Either you own your own body, somebody else owns your own body, or your body is unowned or unownable. So the thing is, given the fact that we know nobody else owns your body, or that it's not morally acceptable for anyone else to own your body, and given the fact that if you are unowned or unownable, that would mean you're not an object in space. Because to own something fundamentally means to control the resource, to have determinant, to be able to willfully determine what happens to the resource, and to be legally justified or legitimate in doing so. So the issue of moral legitimacy is, of course, an issue that is not something that you're going to say, well, here's the moral legitimacy atom in this thing that physically cues it as being morally legitimate. A normative framework is that which acknowledges as an opening salvo that individuals have moral agency, that actions can either be wicked, good, or neutral, that there are states of moral status. Bye bye. Sorry I was yelling when you came in. um, there are states of moral status. You can be something can be either morally permissible, morally impermissible, or morally obligatory. We know this necessarily is the case because if it's not the case that there are any moral axioms, then there's no justification for for applying punishments or for having any expectations. It's a time issue fundamentally. The fact that I have this pack of cigarettes now can either mean that I can assume I'm going to have it later, or it can mean that it is subject to seizure at any point. If it's subject to seizure at any point, then I have to make a determination about how badly I want to hide it or something like that. But the point is, the use of force is a real physical phenomenon. And thus, and it's the most important one, frankly, and we have to find some way of determining when use of force is legitimate and when it is not. So, am I back? Am I back and better than ever? Okay. So, the thing is this. In order to buy into this framework, you have to concede, number one, that we need some way of determining which is an acceptable and which is an unacceptable use of force. Okay? And that the alternative is that we use no system to determine that, in which case all uses of force are equally legitimate. And if, in fact, all the uses of force are equally legitimate, then
we're sorry for the interruption, and we will be back shortly to our regular viewing schedule.
Can you guys hear me again? Okay. So I don't know how much of that was missed by you guys, but the gist of it is we go into the issue of rights and so forth with the following realities. One, that people are moral agents who take action that have impacts on other people that we designate as either wicked, good, or neutral. And we have a circumstance in which, what the fuck? Am I back? Can anybody hear me? Can you hear me? No? God damn it. What the hell's the problem here? Well, whatever. I don't even know what's going on here. But we need to adjudicate the issue of use of force because otherwise we don't. The alternative is not to. And it's preferable that we do than not. We have to acknowledge that individuals act and that they have impacts. And it's preferable that we have a framework to adjudicate the legitimacy of those than it is that we don't have such a framework. So I don't know if I'm back or not. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I can still recording anyway. So I'm going to finish the last little bit of this by simply saying, at the end of the day, it boils down to the justifications for this boil down to the fact that we can split all possibilities into a finite number of options, and we can eliminate some of those options, leaving only certain options behind as a possible conclusion to draw. And because of that deductive process, and because of some basic realities in life, the fact that violence exists, the fact that we either designate some of it legitimate and some of it illegitimate, or we designate it all equally valid, and the fact that axiomatically we accept that certain outcomes are good and bad based on either pain and suffering and pleasure, or based on consistency with some sort of metric or some other methodology by which we adjudicate moral action. So given the fact that we will have a normative framework necessarily, it makes the most sense to have one that's consistent logically over one that's inconsistent logically, and utilitarian outcomes tend to bear this out. When we justify shit for utilitarian reasons and ignore axiomatic universalist principles that suggest that this violence is unjust and this violence is illegitimate, we end up with what Taylor calls the biggest human rights violation everyone's cool with, namely drug laws. And that is what happens when we ignore principalism. We ignore ends don't justify the means. We ignore that principle, and say, well, but we really don't like drugs. Well, but we really don't like speeding, so we're going to have this system in place that's resulted in vast amounts of wealth being directed towards the punitive law enforcement aspects of government, and many, many people put in jail for things like bench warrants for failing to appear for a ticket and shit like that. And not a single one of those people did any harm. They drove a little too fast, but they didn't crash. They didn't hurt anybody. There's no harms done except the harms done by the state. But those harms aren't counted in the equation. When you measure what the traffic laws do, oh, they reduced traffic fatalities by 10%. And they increased incarcerations by 20%. And they sucked this many billions of dollars out of the economy. And they supported an industry that exists purely to continue its own purpose, namely a highway patrol or something. Like, those sort of things happen because we are not compelling our policy to represent the truth. We're allowing it to represent illogical, inconsistent things and saying, well, we'll make exceptions here because we're really convinced that we can predict the future correctly. If we just make our drug laws tough enough, eventually people will stop doing drugs. We're sure of our prediction. It's hubris. It's utilitarian hubris. We must adhere to our universal principles and avoid things that are morally impermissible, or else we will commit, as we are currently engaged in, the biggest human rights violation that everybody's cool with. And the reason everybody's cool with it, because not enough people have heard this little spiel here. Thanks for watching Talk with Friends, people. I'm sorry. Any comments on this? It's just a primer, and I know it's not thorough, but it gives you some ideas about where I'm coming from on this.
Yeah, no, I have some points to make.
Okay.
Well, I guess I'll start with this. So your ontology works with a needed conception of God having free will and having purpose and having design and having meaning for things. Would you agree with that?
I mean, it makes unnecessary the relative absoluteness of it to have an absolute absoluteness of it. But either way, it works.
It won't work if it's relativist.
Well, it does work if the relativism is structured such that there's a finite number of options you can eliminate some of them. Then it's logically absolute, but not physically absolute.
Well, there's no logic in relativism. There's no absolute logic. It would just be your opinion versus mine.
Hey, Mark,
no, hold on a minute. No, this is important, Eric. Eric, this is important. Important, Eric. Important. You have to have everybody agree with your ontology. First off, to have moral principles. Where are these moral principles you're referring to?
Define it, okay? Do you know what relativism means?
That there aren't truths independent of you.
No.
Your truth is just as...
That's not what relativism means. No.
It's postmodernism. That's how I'm using it in that sense.
Okay, well, then you're using it wrong.
I'm using it in a postmodern sense.
Okay, if you're talking about moral relativism, you're right. That's saying, normally when people use the term moral relativism, they're saying that all moral frameworks are equal. I'm not making that argument at all. In fact, I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm a moral absolutist.
But you need this God you're referring to be there.
So do you want me to explain why I don't?
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, I don't need perfect pitch to correctly sing in key relative to each other the notes of Mary Had a Little Lamb. So you wouldn't say to me, that's the wrong tune just because it's not starting in 440A. That's what you're saying is, well, look, you can't even have Mary Had a Little Lamb without 440A. Irrelevant. I'm not trying to prove Mary Had a Little Lamb exists. I'm trying to prove that Mary Little Lamb is sung correctly like this.
But you're referring to an existent Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Right, because the analogy is pitch, okay? If I sing this, ah, it's a perfect fifth. It is absolutely a perfect fifth. It doesn't matter whether I start on ah or ah. It's a perfect fifth either way. And you may note, yeah, but Eric, you don't have perfect pitch. You don't know what A is. You don't know what notes those were. It doesn't matter because my relative pitch is correct. And so as a consequence, that perfect fifth is a perfect fifth indisputably, regardless of what note it started on.
The relationship between those parts is an entity that you're referring to that exists. You're still referring to an absolute. You can't get away from. You can't just say they're relative to one another, because the whole then is real. That's what you're referring to. You're referring to a real thing.
Mark, that's why I made the distinction that is necessary for you to understand about relativism and absolutism. It is absolutely true according to a relative metric. It might also be what you say, absolutely true according to an absolute metric. But that's not what I'm arguing, so there's no point in going there.
Well, with these moral truths that you're talking about, where do they come from?
Like I said, I don't need to say where they come from. I need to establish that they're the only reasonable, logical alternative given the set of finite possibilities. That's why. That's how come it's relatively absolutely true, but not absolutely true.
Okay, so you're relying upon the community to agree with you.
Nope. I'm relying on the exclusivity of language. So because words mean certain things, they don't mean other things. And as a consequence, we can do logical deduction from language that is relatively absolute. And that is what we're trying to do in this setting. What you keep trying to do is saying, no, your relative absoluteness is meaningless without the absolute absoluteness. And that may be the case, but within the framework of what we're talking now, it's absolutely not meaningless. In fact, we're specifically arguing about whether it's relatively absolute, not whether it's absolutely absolute. And you want to say, because I'm arguing relatively absolute, that it's not absolute at all, or that, in fact, it's not adequate, I need to argue absolutely absolute, but you're simply wrong on that point.
Well, I mean, you're referring to the absolute anyway. You're using the
distinction. I think you understand it. Don't pretend you don't.
No, I do understand the distinction that you're trying to make, but it doesn't work, is my point, because you know what you're doing. But anyway, you have to understand that there's people.
If we're trying to play it in 440A, but we're not.
The relationship is a thing. I'm not talking about 440A or whatever. The relationship between the parts is an entity.
Okay, so it's not an entity. Well, they're metaphysical time objects. That's true. They can be, but I mean, even so, the point is, on a soccer field, what I'm showing you is that this team scored more goals and won the game. Now, what you're saying is, yeah, but they're not really the better team. But you didn't show that they're the better team. I'm not trying to show that they're the better team. I'm trying to show that they won the game. And this is a conflict you and I have had for a long time. You don't understand separating out an argument into a distinct box and having it run its course according to its own rules without bringing in God from outside. That's not part of this discussion.
Totally agree. Because I don't think things work like that. Everything is unified in some sense.
Well, that may be the case, but unfortunately, the human brain is not wired to deal with a massive holistic that includes all possible variables. What we do instead is we approximate out subsystems from within that, and we do the parsing of introverted thinking. You do it all the time, but you don't like where it runs out of ground. But it's fine where it runs out of ground. That's where it's supposed to run out of ground. If you could logically deduce God, he wouldn't be God.
Right, but I can deduce God's existence and God in analogous terms, who he is and what he is and things like that.
There's a lot of good reasons to think that God.
I would agree. The source. I think the source is beyond thinking, and it's beyond those sort of things. I agree with you.
Okay.
Totally with you. But it doesn't mean that it's not related. Everything isn't related to it. It doesn't mean that.
I'm interested in making a video at some point in which I argue again the best arguments in favor of God's existence. But that's not what I'm arguing here.
Okay, we'll settle it with you're trying to separate the system and have it run its own race within its own, barriers and everything. And I'm looking at it more holistically, and therefore we're going to come into disagreement on that.
Right, and the thing is, I'm not asking you for much. I'm just saying, can we agree that within this race that I've set up here, within this race course, and within these rules that make sense for all parties, that this car won the race within this framework? That's all I'm asking, really. I'm not saying agree with me it's the preferred framework. That's a later argument. I'm just saying, look, if we set it up so that 2 equals 3 and 3 equals 5, then isn't 2 plus 3 8? And the answer is yes.
Right, and then I can do anything with that framework, and I can make anything true. So that's terrible.
No, you can't. No, you can't make anything true.
In this framework where murder is okay, is murder okay?
Hold on. Let me show you what you can't make true. You can't make true this. 2 plus 3 equals 5. That's false now.
If you said in this framework where 2 plus 3 equals 5, 2 plus...
I said the framework is this. 2 equals 3, and 3 equals 5. Okay? So I said 2 plus 3 equals 8, and that's correct. And he said, yeah, but then anything's true. Nope, 2 plus 3 equals 5 is now false. And that's relatively absolute.
I'm not saying it in that sense. I'm saying it. You can use that sort of framework to make whatever you want to be the case.
No, because the conclusion is not this is so in reality. The conclusion is this argument won within this framework.
Yeah, within a wrong one.
Okay, Mark, that's not what we're discussing.
That's where we disagree. Eric, that's where we disagree. And that's where I'm saying that we have to disagree on that.
But
I have other points I want to go
to. Frameworks aren't right or wrong. They're saying, what does this look like through this red lens? What does it look like through this yellow lens? You're saying, yeah, but that's the wrong lens. No, lenses can't be wrong, Mark. They're just appropriate or inappropriate to use them in this context.
Yeah, I don't agree with you. There's wrong things, and that's that.
But you do agree with me because you argue like you agree with me all the time.
I agree with the outcomes. A lot of the outcomes you come to, I don't know all of them, but a lot of them, sure.
No, but you argue using TI exclusivity and conditionality and parsing shit out. You argue that way all the time until it comes to the fact that it apparently justifies something you don't like, which is relativism, which is just it isn't even the thing you think it is. But regardless, the point is you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want conditionality to work in your favor when it does, and then when it doesn't, you don't like it anymore. I'm gonna smoke a cigarette.
Okay, I'm gonna turn my phone off real quick then.
So I said, you know me. I said I try to just stay on the sidelines. And she goes, he doesn't. I said, yeah, you're right. And she goes, I really like Eric. And I said, well, good. I said, that's important to me. And she says, but I want you to know. She said, you're entering into a relationship where he's going to control you. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she goes, well, I'm your mother, and I know what it is that you need. And she said, and I think that he is good for you. She says, but I don't want you to lose touch of what's important to you. And I said, okay. All right, we done yet?
A couple years ago, I would have been shocked to hear anybody call me control. I've never self-identified as control, but I am kind of controlling. It's true. The thing is, I'm controlling in a very loose sense.
I'll see.
What I mean by controlling in a loose sense is, that means, I can be very careful when I go. Controlling in a loose sense does that mean I want us on the same page in general about priorities and stuff like that, and then the actual mechanic of how it plays out, I don't care about the specifics of it. But I just need to know that we're on the same page. In that regard, I control. But yeah, I'm not micromanaging at all.
Micromanaging a little bit of where I'm at when it's really right in the very, very beginning that I need to catch up. And it's taking a little bit of time to process everything. I can't do that. And you told me from the very beginning that you understood that. And I've not been real patient with that.
Well, I think we both are guilty of hearing the things we want to hear and not hearing the things we don't want to hear. So it's like, I did explain that I'm not micromanaging at all. I also
but
said,
you're getting more as time goes on.
But I also said clearly that, remember, there's a process at the beginning of trust building where I get comfortable so that I know when you're gone and I don't know where you are, I no longer even cross my mind that you're cheating early. This is a process. I said that too. The part you remember is the part that's not the process part. Because that's not naturally how you think. It's kind of the process different.
But is it not interesting how everybody else that seems to meet you or meet us, that's the first thing they pick up on?
That they're not controlling?
Yeah.
So who else has had that conclusion?
Mary?
Okay.
Suzanne?
Okay. I'm not disputing it, keep in mind. I'm not disputing the conclusion of controlling, but I'm saying what's not being understood by, I don't think, any parties here is, no, except for me, is the process aspect of things. Everyone wants to draw conclusions on current data, but they don't factor into the current data my change over time since I've been with you already. So it's like, they don't say, oh, well, Eric's...
Well, I can't monitor that because I didn't know you before you met you.
But you
I'm
knew
only reacting to what you're doing now.
But I said change over time since I met you.
I don't want it to be that spread out.
Okay, but I said change over time since I met you. Not change over time, including the time I didn't meet you. Alright, so I need to put okay, so I'm gonna go get another nail. song in which I respond to that particular not always debate time, not always getting there. Not as much as I enjoy that.
Fresh air?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting more nails, but this thing's not solid yet. And you know, the funny thing is, what do I always get from people? Let me turn this off first of all. I gotta go. I'll see you guys. What I always get from people is this. I get, you always have to be right. Not everything's a debate. Why do you always have to be right? Stuff like that. What I don't get is you're not actually always right, or you're wrong in this instance, Eric, and that's the problem, or anything like that. I always get things that aren't telling me I'm wrong, they're telling me I don't know, but I know I'm right. And that's just, I mean, what am I supposed to do with that, you know?
Except that you're not always right, Eric.
Okay, I do. I'm not the demigod who's ever wrong. I've many times been wrong. I've conceded many points. Nobody seems to care. I concede points all the time. Here, let me I'm gonna put this thing on up right here. So that
But you're nailing it down so much that you're trying to let me have the flexibility now.
I'm not nailing it down at all. I'm making it to hold it.
Because I want to be able to rinse this off when I need to rinse it off.
Okay, well.
So this is heavy. It's just going to get dirty.
Okay, then why don't we take it down and take it down first.
I'll just do that.
Okay.
But I also don't like that it's so. It looks kind of weird. I want it to just look like a nice.
You want to take it down and do it again?
Let's just do it right.
Yeah,
Just like, you know, and then when we need to cover it.
Let's take down the pole, okay? And let's just hang it on the nails itself.
Because I don't like that. I want it to be able to move.
But do you often move it?
Yes.
Okay, then.
Sometimes I want more coverage than others.
Okay, alright. Now look, I think the problem is we've got two of them connected here, right? Let's do them one at a time instead.
This one was too big, so I was trying to fold it.
Trying to fold it how?
I was trying to make it so that it's short because I don't want it hanging on the ground.
Okay, well let's do this then. Let's put this through here. It's not folding the way you're folding, let's try a different one. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, I got you. These are very helpful. These are cool. I have the other things. I have the other things. Oh, it's here. So
So for this length, that would be great.
you just need to go like that then, right? If we're gonna fold it, we fold it a little bit this way. Let's go, let's count down for a second. Okay, we put this down on the ground. Put it down on the ground, and then fold it just a little bit this way. It'll be the right way. Okay.
I think it needs to be more than that.
More than this?
Yeah.
Well, let's hold it up now and see. Okay, we've got this fold. Let's take a look. Now, I mean, you hold that and I'll hold this in. Remember, it's going like this at the top.
Oh.
You can hold that in.
I see.
Up. Can you see the right way? Yeah, okay, so that's the good way. So then we just need to do this. Ow! Ow! Fucking ow! What the fuck is wrong with my hand? Ow! Ow, 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 ow! crucial one. Any other one on the landscape? Now just slide. Hold your slide level.
Coffee, tea, water? No, thank you. How are you feeling? Terrible. Stressful?
It's hard, yeah.
I know it is.
And it's,
Okay, I'm gonna get a few things and then get some music. I'm gonna get water.
Tony? I am just fine, sweetie.
What, Darren?
85 milligrams to start the day. Hey, look at this, I've made a song. Choose. Well, yeah, you've got to choose. I won't allow you to avoid making a real decision. Well, you have to choose. I will not allow you to get away with avoiding a decision. 85 milligrams to start the day. Hey, look at this, I've made a song. Choose. Well, yeah, you've got to choose. I won't allow you to avoid making a real decision. Well, you have to choose. I will not allow you to get away with avoiding a decision. I know that you love what you love, and the glove that fits on the hand is not the same. Secession of the story. Choose. Secession of the week doesn't mean a party. Choose. Secession of the past. Wire that we give up the last. Secession of the future means giving up the dream. I feel sick to my stomach. You got to choose. Catch your breath. You gotta catch your breath. Got to choose. Choose.
find a hairdresser you like better up there?
It's gonna be hard to find. How many years? 15, 14?
I'll go have a cigarette with you.
Oh my gosh, you smoke?
I sure do.
I told you he's a chain smoker just like you.
Can I sit on the
You can say whatever you like, Karen. You are the client.
You get to see me. I like it.
I like it. I like the new style.
It's it.
That's bold. That was a bold choice.
I wish I could wear like this.
Very cool. There's no doubt that would be a bold choice to go out like that.
Should have done it 50 years ago.
Never the way it starts though.
So that's all you do. Like in Ohio, I might be stuck there for a couple months, so that would be the only thing that, you know.
Well, and then the stupid haircut that they're gonna give you.
What kind of place in Ohio are you going to?
Columbus.
I was in Dayton not too long ago.
That's really close. It's a little more south, I guess.
Fun.
I lived in Ohio for most of my I graduated from high school there.
So-
I was there 2 years later.
Real quick, want me to just take a picture of your hair from back to?
I want you to take a picture of us. Like this. Can you get my phone?
This is one of Kimberly's quirky customers.
Very cool
You
looking.
say quirky different.
I love those flowers.
Like curl. Yeah, I'm gonna redo my whole front now that my house is painted. Eric,
Yeah.
this is not
What?
gonna happen.
I'm looking for my phone.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I have to come up with my car makeup here. I don't want to go to anybody else.
And I don't want you going anywhere.
This is my cigarette. Oh, yeah.
Karen, do you want a picture of you? You need to ask Karen this.
No, I'm kidding. But you're just so sharp and like. Please tell me if you're not sharp and
Stop taking actually it's the way that this is.
Way backlit or what?
I like probably.
Can we turn this way? The black thing behind us, is that behind us?
Look,
Yeah, I'll turn this way.
Okay, you get over here. We'll be okay.
what is going on?
Let's see what we get.
I can't take pictures of you because my camera. She doesn't know. Okay.
No cigarette? I want to smoke.
Oh no,
you want to
that
smoke?
would. Oh hell yes.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I can have it right here. But I'm the only person that's not smoking. We're antisocial.
We're anti-modern world. Modern world says we can't smoke anything.
I know Laguna's gonna have it. So the whole.
That's a good one. That's a great
God, look
picture.
at that. Oh
That's
God.
great.
Blackmail me with it.
That's fantastic.
Say that doesn't so ready to smoke.
Well, it's just, you and I look like we're about ready to go kick some ass and take some names, you know?
Well, a few years ago, huh? I
Karen
could've-
needs to kick some ass and take some names.
Don't we all?
Yeah,
It's gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. It's just,
I am.
it'll all work out. You know, it'll all work out.
I tried to get a huge dumpster like they use for construction sites. They couldn't get it in because they can't back it in.
Oh yeah.
Because of the state. I saw my, because I was trying furniture out and dumping it. And now I had to get the smaller one, so. So what, well, you got your, how many hours a week are you working?
15.
Well, that's like just enough.
Yeah. Right now, yes.
Is it like 3 days or something like that?
It's 3 days,
Yeah.
5-hour shifts. My grandfather died 3 days ago.
Oh, gosh.
So did that. So I've got all this weird, crazy shit going on in my personal life. I forgot to go to work yesterday. I didn't forget to go. I forgot which time my shift was. I thought my shift was 4 to 9.
Uh-huh.
It was 12 to 5. So I didn't fucking show up to work.
So what
a lot going on. And they talked to me about it a little, so you know what, it was. The funeral was that weekend, and I just had a lot, you know, just was out of it. It was a long weekend. So I'll just explain to them.
How'd your grandmother do?
She's in the hospital now, too. Yeah.
That's your mom's parents?
Yeah, my dad's parents.
Or your dad's parents?
So I got all that emotional stuff going on because, you know, my situation with my parents and my dad or whatever. But anyways, things are going really well with Eric. My mom came up this morning about a haircut, and she's fine with Eric. And my friends hate Eric.
Of course. You know, that's the way it goes. If you like something,
Yeah, they don't like, they're like all of a sudden, because Kimberly's always there for everybody. They don't like that Kimberly's not there for everybody. So
that's what they meant. Like it's sad to say, isn't it? It's sad fact of
Why
life.
she was being so horribly mean about things that, like, it's like things that she felt about me, but she didn't feel safe to say until now that she's mad at me. Now she's just blasting me with all this horrible stuff. And
Oh, you've been friends long?
not too long, maybe 2 years. She's a neighbor. And she's kind of like, yeah, went through divorce with her husband and cheated on her, so she's really
bitter
bitter.
anyhow, yeah.
She's bitter anyhow.
Yeah.
So
It's so
anyway,
sad though when you get close to somebody and then turn. That's how it was with
I
Darwin.
knew she was kind of, yeah, I
It
knew
was
she
that
was
way with
kind of
Darwin. I had to
like
put
that.
up with a lot.
Yeah, I had to put up with a lot with Mary too. She's so needy and so, you know, crazy as she's going through all of this. And I've kind of been her crutch, you know, holding her up. And when she cries, she comes down, we visit, we go have dinner once in a while. But boy, the minute I, like, you know, find a life for myself that she constantly says I deserve, once I get that, it's like she fights everything she can to, like, destroy it.
Women are terrible.
God, women are terrible.
And they're
catty and
Catty.
bitchy and jealous and competitive.
they're not faithful.
No, they're not.
You know, you can't count on them.
Like, anybody who knows me long enough knows I have been giving myself to my son, I've given myself to every one of my friends, every one of my family members. And
You're always there.
I deserve to have somebody in my life. get real, they start whipping their dicks out and want to do sword fights. Peacock feathers go up.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
trying to protect my mother. And
And he's going to couches.
yeah.
He's going to be a special one.
Yeah.
He's doing good in school.
He's doing really good school, he's doing really good at work. I didn't realize what I said. Dude. Oh. Yeah. So I said to him, dude, this is happening. Get used to it. And he's doing much better. I said, what do you want? He said, you want me to be happy. I said, let me be happy. What you're doing is not making me happy. So,
I mean, David's kids actually have fun with him. He's finally moving him in his girlfriend. And cigarettes that I will not go over. I thought she spit the whole time. And he said he's good for his wife. He doesn't for anybody else, but he's kidding for one.